Hi, Wesley Eugene. How are you going? And let's tell the listeners where you are.
Sure. Hey, Kat, I'm doing pretty well. I am here in sunny and beautiful Sydney, Australia.
Yes, you are. You are actually in my hometown, and we are so excited to have you here. And you're over here because we're developing a product under the Humanising IT, and it's very exciting what we're doing, and we'll talk about that soon. But we thought, what a great opportunity to do our podcast. It has been some time, as I said, because we're busy. Our last guest was our wonderful friend, David Ratcliffe.
Yeah.
We had such remarkable feedback, downloads, hits on our website from David. So if you're listening, David, thank you so much. And as we said, we just thought, let's do one together. And next time we'll be asking from guests. So, Wes, we had a coffee yesterday and we had a lot of heated discussions, didn't we, about IT service management?
Oh, yeah, we did. And some challenging topics. But, I think it's perfect to bring these conversations to our audience and see what other folks think.
Absolutely. So let's start with one of them. A lot of organizations do maturity assessments on their IT service management. Now, I have my views on that. You're a former CIO, or you are a CIO, I should say. Did you ever have a maturity assessment done, or had you been part of one? What did you think? And how did you score?
Yeah, several. I almost always scored somewhat low in these maturity assessments. But honestly, Kat, in my experience, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with these maturity assessments, right? A lot of them are premised on the capability maturity model, with you looking to get to this lofty goal of number 5 in maturity. And I've got a lot of problems with that.
Yeah.
What's your view of these maturity assessments?
Yeah, as a consulting company, we've done quite a few assessments and we've never got above 1.8. And usually, if I've got to be honest, it's sitting on a 1, if not lower. And I quite often say to Wes, do you want to be a 5? And most IT organizations don't. But I think that 1 is quite low. And I also have issue on the traditional way of measuring these maturity assessments, where we look at processes. For example, is there a process owner? Is there a common repository? Knowledge articles, are they updated every 6 months? And they're very binary measurements or metrics. And I don't think it really gets to what we should be measuring. Of course, we need to measure the governance side of IT service management. But, traditionally, we don't measure what I think matters. And things like the culture, how you manage experience, how you might work with your suppliers, etc. It was very process-based. And I just found that didn't really give a true assessment of how an organization, the current state or future state also.
Yeah, well, that's part of my problem with it, right? It takes an approach that is premised on the assumption that if fidelity and adherence to a process is as complete as it can be, then the organization is healthy, your practice of ITSM is healthy, and your business is meeting its goals. That is a faulty assumption. You can have the best knowledge management, problem management, incident management, change management. You could be testing 5s across each of those, and you can still not be serving the needs of your business. So what?
I love that, Wes. Yeah, I mean, you're meeting some metrics, but you're probably not meeting the one that matters. Yeah, very interesting. The next question that we spoke about was, and we want to do a debate on this with some, I guess, that we're invited in our next series. Should we take the IT out of IT service management?
Yeah. I've got mixed feelings on this, as you know. On one hand, it makes sense in this era of digital transformation. The truth about the matter is that the digital experience goes far beyond IT right now. Like, we think about the employee experience specifically. To have a fulsome employee experience, you've got the digital integration of HR, finance, IT, and so many other groups, right? to ensure that employee experience is as wholesome and powerful as it could be. And so that, in a sense, argues for a more expansive view of IT service management to think more around enterprise service management and how can an enterprise be serving the needs in a kind of collaborative and in a very true partnership model in a shared way, serve the needs of your organization. The reason why I just can't surrender to that though, so the other voice in my head here is really the voice that is speaking about the intrinsic complexity of IT. And yes, arguably I'm biased because I've got a multi-decade career in IT spanning almost every role in the life cycle except for a full stack engineer. But the truth about the matter is IT is wildly complicated. It's a very complex orchestration of all these different assets, people, resources, services to deliver these business goals. And I find in my experience, it's much more complicated than, say, and I'm sure we'll get some emails on this, but more complicated than HR frameworks, for example, more complex even than finance, because finance, although it can be quite complex, it is very much a bit binary. Here's what you need. Here's what you don't need. Here's your inputs and outputs, your debits and credits. IT doesn't really operate that way. So with the complexity, I think it still calls for attention to IT service management, but with an acknowledgement that enterprise service management is happening and IT service management needs to operate in a holistic way within a broader enterprise service management framework.
Yeah, I agree, Wes, on most of the things you're saying. As I often say, that we forget how complex IT service management is, and the issue of all these new ways of working coming out, and you're calling it enterprise service management or service management. I think what we forget is that you talked about the employee experience. Well, wasn't IT service management always responsible for serving the business? That's why we're here. And the purpose of IT, or why IT was created, that I was taught, it was to automate business transactions. That's what IT came about. And then all of a sudden, I've said this before, Wes, that we get confused with what it is. And it is about IT service management. So my view is we should not take the IT out of IT service management. I don't disagree. It should be a different capability, but you shouldn't get the same capability trying to do that. I fundamentally, once again, disagree.
All right, well, let's dig into that just a little bit. I would say IT cannot be territorial about it then. If you're going to keep calling it IT service management, recognize that HR has a seat at the table. Finance has a seat at the table. Marketing has a seat at the table. Like, everyone has a seat at the IT service management table now. And they're all players in determining and designing these IT services. And in my experience, IT folks remain very territorial, and they're like, hey, you're from HR. I don't care how savvy you are with digital. You don't belong here. You're not one of us, right? That doesn't play anymore.
Yes and no. I think when you say they have a seat at the table, yeah, they only have a seat at the table for entree. They're not interested in coming out the back and washing the dishes. Called IT operations. You know what I mean? And that's what I think
Yeah,
we get confused. Yeah.
I do know what you mean. Unfortunately, I've seen behaviors that don't acknowledge the importance of collaboration with our business partners. And I've seen it over and over again. So IT effectively wants to almost own everything from the back of house. I'm in the kitchen preparing the meal to going out and serving it on a platter. And it's like, no, there's someone else in the role of taking that from the kitchen and bringing it to the table. And yep, there may be someone else that comes out and checks in occasionally the chef may get a chance to walk around the restaurant and greet the customers, but that's not the chef's primary job. And there becomes a ton of friction when everyone doesn't understand that they have a role to play in this framework. And you can't be too precious about it. You've got to realize the limitations of your role and where you need to lean in on collaboration more than anything else.
And that's exactly right. And as you know, that's what I talk about in my book when we talk about value streams, is that we use the analogy of someone in the kitchen and serving the food, et cetera, et cetera. And IT is in the kitchen, and very rarely, as you know, my opinion, do we get out the front. And in Humanising IT, that we say, and this is another question I'll pose to you, is that I don't believe that IT service management is responsible for customer experience. It's responsible for user experience. And again, I think this is where we get.
Wait, hold on a second there, Kat. Like, what's a customer and what's a user? And, is a user someone who's getting used? I mean, help me understand.
Yes. And, when we were writing the book, Wes, we spent a lot of time on, should we call someone a user? And because, as you know, and you're part of what we do when we do the boot camps and training, a lot of people don't like the word user because in Europe, a lot don't. And when we were writing the book, I don't particularly like it either, but it fitted because it was more, it resonated as meaning that, like in Europe, sometimes they're called business associates or colleagues. There was just so many variations of it. So user just seemed to fit. So we'll go with user for now, but user is somebody in the business, and a customer is someone that is typically pays for the service. So again, we use an analogy of a restaurant, if you work for a big chain store, whatever, food chain, very rarely in IT would you be serving a customer. Or again, the analogy I use, if you work for a hospital in IT, very rarely would you speak to a patient. So they're your customers. So the role of IT service management is to provide a service to the user, so the users can provide that service to the customer. And so that's why I kind of get a little bit frustrated, for want of a better word, that we have to be more customer focused. I hear that a lot from the C-suite. And I'm like, how can we be customer focused when we don't even speak to customers? So the term I use is that we need to be more user focused, and IT service management cannot be responsible for something that they cannot control.
Well, I'll challenge that a little bit. I do think that IT does need to be more customer focused, but here's my interpretation of that. And you talk about this in your book. I love the anecdote about a mop in the moon, where you talk about JFK visiting NASA and stopping to introduce himself to everyone practically, up until this moment where he meets a janitor, right? And he introduces himself to the janitor, and he asks the janitor, "Hey, what are you doing?" This guy's standing there with a mop in his hand. It looks quite obvious that he's mopping the floor. Well, what he says is he's helping to put a man on the moon. And, one of the organizations that I had the pleasure of serving in my career was a company called Aflac. Still a brilliant company, doing great things in the world. And I bring them up because one thing I felt Aflac did very well during my tenure there is that even though IT, like we know, it's like back of house, right? In our town halls, we would see inspirational videos of exactly how our products were impacting the lives of our customers, who were oftentimes, if you needed Aflac care, it wasn't a good day for you because you probably have a cancer diagnosis or something of the sort, and someone you love is fighting for their life. It's not a good day. But we would show these videos of these journeys and these testimonies. Sometimes we'd actually have some of these claimants come in and say, "Hey, my life is better because Aflac stood in the gap. Now I'm on the path to recovery." And honestly, at those moments, I said, wait a second, I'm not just the chief of staff to IT anymore. I'm helping to ensure that someone battling pediatric cancer has the tools, the resources they need to focus on getting healthy. And all of us got really inspired by that shared mission.
Yeah.
And that, I believe, is something that we need to overcome in IT today. You're not just a developer, you're not just a network operator, or you're not just a service management leader. You're helping the business to make a difference in this world. If you can't get excited about that, maybe you're in the wrong company.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, and I've said this before, Wes, is that when a company achieves great success, whether it's financial or through branding, they've done something great, and we have the town halls, as you said, very rarely is the developer up on the stage and getting acknowledged for the work that they've done to contribute. And that annoys me because, as I said, I'm very passionate that IT people are not celebrated enough for the work that they do. And as we all know, and this brings us to the next topic, if it wasn't for IT, a business would not survive. And I think sometimes we forget that IT is probably the most important department of an organization.
Yeah, so that's a fair point. And most recently, a couple weeks ago, put out a post celebrating our unsung IT heroes, right? Because in the wake of the CrowdStrike Microsoft incident, I knew hundreds of folks who were canceling vacations, working through nights and weekends to bring services back online after a outage that they had no control over.
Yeah.
Right. And while people were quite frustrated, I being one, I should have been in Jamaica, and instead my bags went on a 7-day vacation, and I sat home trying to figure out how to get them back to me. So I understand the frustration of being a customer impacted by that outage, but the first responders were IT. And, when we have natural disasters like some crazy fire burning the Amazon, or whether we're dealing with an earthquake, or whether we're dealing with terrorism, when you see firefighters, EMT, you see medical professionals out there on the front lines, you're like, that's praise these first responders. IT professionals are also first responders, but because they're not visible, we often overlook them and overlook their contributions.
Absolutely. And the next point is that, as you know, humanizing IT is about complementing existing IT service management frameworks, where also I feel there was some gaps. We look at major incident management or incident management as an example, where quite often as a consulting company, we'll get called in and we're told we've got to improve our incident management process. Users are complaining, it's not good enough, et cetera, et cetera. And what we turn around and say, invariably, we'll obviously do a bit of research first, but your incident management process is awesome. And so are the people doing incident management. They are doing a fantastic job. What's failing them is what sits around that. And that's, as we know, is called experience. So how can you expect an incident manager to be writing calm, seeing if the users are okay, if they're busy putting out a fire? And the truth of the matter is you can't. And, we ask IT organizations who owns the incident management process or whatever process. There's always a process owner. And when we ask who owns the experience of incident management, the answer is typically silenced. And that is what we bring to humanizing IT. And the next point, Wes, is that I say that IT professionals are unknowingly and unwittingly tasked with UX and CX. And we're not trained in it. So every time you update a ticket, every time you write a knowledge article, every time you design the IVR to call the service desk, that is all part of experience. And we're not trained in it. So we have technical people that are amazing at what they do, trying to do a job that a designer would do. And as you know, that's why we do humanizing IT. Do you agree that we as IT professionals are tasked as I said, unknowingly and unwittingly with UX and CX.
Yes. And unfortunately, IT professionals are unknowingly and unwittingly also tasked with delivering IT service management. It's perhaps the most ironic thing ever that, yeah, I agree with you. We're in wild agreement that IT professionals are unknowingly and unwittingly tasked with UX and CX for sure. There's no question about that. And a big paradigm shift needed there is an acknowledgement that there is an experience that you're impacting, and to get intentional about that and move from a posture of being passive about it to an active posture where you're owning it, you're defining it, you're designing it with intention. But the other point I made, a little tongue in cheek, is that, and maybe this is a throwback to the whole conversation around maturity models. Quite a lot of IT professionals are still gapped in their understanding of what IT service management even is. And that's also a challenge.
Could you expand on that?
Well, if you would ask a developer, do they understand what IT service management is? They might be like, they understand SAFe as an agile practice. They understand parallel development. They understand all these different processes. They'll go into different ways. They'll talk your ears off about prompt engineering these days, architecture. But when you ask them, do they understand IT service management, or whether or not they even understand their role within IT service management, that they actually have an active role in IT service management, you'll likely hear crickets.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to pick on developers. No. This is true in other parts of IT as well. And I'm not trying to pick on IT professionals as much as to say that at the end of the day, I believe that, and this is the reason I'm skeptical of maturity models as well, is IT ultimately takes the shape of the business. That's what it does. You start up a new business, whether that's putting tires on trucks or delivering fertilizer to farms, and the investments you make in your technology and in your digital capabilities correlate to what is most critical for your business to operate in the world. The things that you underinvest in are also a reflection of what you, at that point in time for your business, don't prioritize as critical to you delivering goods and services to the world. And so when you come into a new organization and you get hypercritical about maturity levels and ignorance around ITSM and ignorance around different things around the experience, oftentimes you have to sit back and reflect on what this business is, what it's trying to do, where it exists in the world. And not that there's not room for improvement, but understand the path that led it to where it is, and have, dare I say it, some empathy.
Yeah.
Some empathy for all the actors that are trying to provide whatever goods and services they are, deliver whatever value they're trying to deliver into the world, and solve from there.
And I agree if we go back to what you're saying about how we're tasked with service management, but we don't really know truly what it is. And that's a pretty controversial statement, but it's actually something I do agree with. And I can say that from my own experience. Like, I worked in IT for many, many years, and I actually didn't really get it. It's interesting. No, I do, of course, but I didn't. And I train and consult, as we both do, Wes. And I find a lot of my students really don't know what it is. That they might work on the service desk. I don't think they don't really understand what it is. And unfortunately, like a lot of people in the business, some people think IT service management is the service desk or incident, problem and change. And that is not service management. And on that note, that's why I saw this huge gap when we do the Humanising IT training. I did make an assumption that IT people did really understand what IT service management is. And I'm not saying everybody, but a large percentage don't. And again, that's not a criticism. So that's why we've invited David Burrow, the remarkable David Burrow in the UK. He's written a book called An Education in Service Management, which is brilliant. And we've included that in our training, the first few chapters, to just provide that education that I think is really needed. Because, IT service management is not the service desk. Or as I often quote, and I've said to you, Wes, I've had a CIO tell me that service management is just about provisioning, which I think I'm going to say made me sad. That I'm being very polite when I say that. I don't know, maybe in his organization that's all it is. But as I mentioned earlier, service management is, once we really get what it is, it's a fantastic capability, but it's misunderstood and I think sometimes abused and misaligned. And it's through our training, it's a great way to learn. Yeah.
It is a great way to learn, and it's a great way to synthesize really what people need most to understand at this point in time, right? When I sit back and think about it throughout my career, I have seen many folks, actors within the IT service management framework, really just doing what they were taught, almost in an apprenticeship model. So they'll follow through, they'll attend a CAB meeting, for example. They'll do all the things they're supposed to do, but they have no knowledge as to why.
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? Why is this important? And then when you bring in what we do with Humanizing IT, the adoption, the identification, and the ownership of the experience, and understanding the intersection of that with process excellence, it's a game changer.
It's a game changer.
It's a new day.
It is. And
it's like Neo waking up in the Matrix and realizing that he can see code just the same way we see trees and rainbows and butterflies.
Yeah. And it is. It's like we challenge and we are controversial. It's like we were discussing yesterday with the problem with P3s. And it's like we are following this path without challenging what service management should be about. And the problem with P3s is that they cause a problem in the business. That's what users get most frustrated with is P3s and how we're prioritizing tickets. And the case study that we're using in our training, Wes, is probably the same with you were just saying when your baggage had a lovely holiday in Jamaica, but that was treated as a low priority because you were only one customer. And so how in IT service management we manage tickets and manage experience, I think was a huge oversight. I get that we have to prioritize tickets. I absolutely get why we do it. But again, we've missed that experience. And I think you said yesterday where it's the impact over time could start off as small, but do we ever think it's small now that it could get bigger? So let's make it a P2 now. Don't wait till we get bigger. And that's sort of what we challenge in Humanizing IT. Think about experience over time, not just at that point in time.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point, right? And yes, I'm still dealing with a little bit of PTSD from that incident I had with Delta. And I'm a Medallion Sky Miles member with Delta. I've been flying with Delta over 20 years. And in that moment, it was very clear to me that Delta had made incredible investments in the customer experience. And like many other companies, had underinvested in the back of house. So baggage handling, specifically exceptions to baggage handling, lacked the proper integrations with the rest of their systems that every other part of their systems have. And it was clear as day. So in a weird way, you see those folks, I had so much sympathy. I can't say empathy, but sympathy for those folks working, trying to restore services, and those folks like managers walking out, giving me bottles of water as I stood in lines that I shouldn't have had to stand in. I understand that they're playing a role in service recovery, and it's not their fault that IT decisions were made at an executive level that put the preponderance of the investment on the digital transformation, on the shiny objects, and the dull objects didn't get the love that they needed. And here they are from within the IT service management framework playing a role that's exacerbated by poor decision making, right? This is tough.
Yeah, yeah. And it's what I say also, I think, lends into this whole how we prioritize and how we design in IT service management is that, everyone's on a digital journey, of course, the AI word and everything else. But I guess what you're just saying too is that I think fundamentally we are still very broken in many areas in IT. And I say it quite often, 2024, and we're still doing password resets manually. We're still having problems onboarding. Every time, I'm going to swear words, every time I walk into a meeting room, the sound doesn't work. It's not connecting to the project. And I'm not saying that's necessarily IT's fault, but there's some stuff that we still got to get right before we think about this whole new world. Because as I said, 2024, and I'm still frustrated. We're still getting error messages that make no sense. We're still doing ticket bouncing in IT service management. Like these things have been going on for decades that is frustrating users and experience. And we're still not addressing them. And so what I say, forget about AI. It's a dirty word at Hit Global. Can we just get the basics right? And not just fix them, but learn why they'd like that. Why is it like that in the first place? And I think, as you know, that's what we say in Humanising IT, is that IT service management, even though I said it's a fantastic framework, capability, whatever you want to call, it didn't think about experience. It didn't think about long and short-term impacts. We did in the here and now. And also what we were saying yesterday was it didn't think about different sizes of organizations. David Ratcliffe said that as well. How do you use IT service management if you're a big company or very big? Do you do knowledge management the same way as you do it for a 10-man show versus a 1,000 show? It was very much, here it is, here's a book and off you go. So I guess what I'm saying is that we need to sort of stop, learn from our mistakes that we did and are still doing before we move forward. I just think we're moving forward and the same mistakes are going to occur. Yeah. So on that note, Wes, I'm going to let you go and enjoy your day in Sydney. And thanks everyone to our listeners. And as we said, our next series, we're going to have potentially 3 or 4 very well-known guests in the industry where we're going to have the great debate. And till then, thanks so much for listening and tuning in. Until next time.